Smooth transitions can definitely make your videos better, but only if they are done well. So in this video I want to give you 8 tips that make your transitions look pro, and especially the last one can be a huge difference in some cases, so definitely watch till the end. I want to start this video by telling you that I also made a lot of mistakes when it comes to transitions. Like when you scroll down on my YouTube feed, you will find some videos where some of the transitions look totally off, they don't fit, etc. And that's okay because it's a learning process. You have to develop a feeling for when a transition is right or wrong, and you can only do that by doing it a lot. So even after watching these videos, if you did mistakes, be okay with it, produce more videos, and after a while you will come to a level where your transitions are good. So I would say let's start with the first tip. Okay, tip number 1, use smooth transitions only where they fit. And I have 2 good examples for that here that are actually a bit too good, I would say. And the first one is here at the waterfall where I have a zoom out transition, and that fits really well because it's at first a close-up shot of the waterfall and then a wide angle shot with a friend in the foreground. And by zooming out it fits perfectly because it's exactly the same waterfall. It pretty much looks like it's an actual zoom out of the camera, so that's a very good example here. And then in the second clip you have this monk here, and I also zoom out, and in that case it's the same, it's also the same monk. I actually filmed the close-up after the wide angle, so when you look closely you actually see that the timing is wrong there, but people don't recognize that because it goes so fast. But it's the same monk, it's the same location, and I stand in the same position, so it's very easy to do this zoom out transition here and have it look good. Now of course you don't have to be exactly at the same place to make a transition fit. Like it's totally fine if you have different places and different subjects that you zoom in and out or that you make your slide transitions into, but it should always be something that makes logical sense or that fits optically to each other. And the second tip is for speed ramp transitions. This is a mistake that I did a lot in the past, but that I also see a lot in beginner videos, and that's that the transitions feel a bit too quick or too snappy or too long or stretched. Like you probably know what I mean. And this is really that if you do speed ramp transitions, you have to play a bit around with the speed and the length of the transition, like where you cut the clip, like how much motion you fit inside or not. An example that you see here right now, the first part of the speed ramp in the first place actually looks really good in the first clip, but then in the second clip, as you can see now, it feels a bit too snappy and the motion comes pretty late. And that's simply a situation where I don't have enough motion within the time frame of the speed ramp. So usually I would remove the speed ramp here again, and then I would do my speed ramp cut at another position so that I fit a bit more motion into the same time of the speed ramp. So I would speed it up probably a bit more even when I fit more motion inside. But in this clip I actually can't do that because there is just not enough motion. Otherwise I wouldn't get the clip anymore. And then the next tip, in tip 3, I would actually show you a technique how you can solve that. But generally for now, if you have this problem where it looks a bit too snappy or it looks a bit too stretched, definitely play a bit around with the speed and the length of the transition, like how much of the motion you fit inside, and you will likely come to a better result. Like 80% of the time that works. Otherwise you would have to use tip 3, which we will talk about now. As you can see in tip 3 here, I have exactly the same transition again, but now it looks a lot better. And here I'm using a plugin from Nangle, which is called Smooth Transition Layers. I think there's a free version of this plugin, but even if you get the paid version with more effects, then it's also not that expensive, like it's $10-15 or something like that. And the nice thing about this plugin is that these transitions don't work like classic transitions that connect the clips actually, but instead they are like titles. So you have one title that you put over the first clip and one title that you put over the second clip, and then it creates this effect. And this also means that you can only use half of that transitions, and this is basically what I did here. Like you can see there is the pen left 1, which I would usually drag over the first clip, and there's the pen left 2, which I drag over the second clip to generate this motion. But because I already have the speed ramp in the first clip, I can only use the pen left 2 over the second clip to give it more motion, and therefore the speed ramp that in tip 2 looked bad suddenly looks good. Of course, what you can also do is to add some motion blur. I also use motion blur here from Nangle. I actually have multiple motion blur plugins because I feel figured out that different motion blur works for different clips, so it's good to have a few more plugins of that. But generally, to make it look even better and to hide some imperfections, you can use motion blur, and I would strongly recommend doing so. That makes your transitions even better. So much for tip 3. If you don't have enough motion in a clip, you can likely use such transition layers to extend the motion. And if you don't use Final Cut, I think there are similar plugins for Adobe Premiere. I'm not sure about DaVinci Resolve, but generally, guys, if you're still on Adobe Premiere, it's time to switch to Final Cut Pro, especially with the new M1 Max. It's a dream. And it's time to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is myself, or better said, my Seamless Mask Transitions pack. If you're watching this video, you're likely interested in mask transitions, but you don't want to spend so much time masking certain stuff in your clips out and animating that, and that's why I created this pack. It's a bunch of clips that you can simply drag over your footage, and instead of masking a subject out, you can add a very basic, simple, straight mask animation below it, so in your actual footage, and suddenly you have a perfect mask transition, as you can see here right now. So if you want to know more about the Seamless Mask Transitions pack and how it works, I will leave a link to that in the description below. And tip number 4 is to avoid artifacts when you use zoom transitions. This happened pretty quickly, and I show you what I mean here. So you see this transition here, and when I stop at the right place, you see that the stones on the right side are actually mirrored in the sky. And that happens because when you use zoom transitions plugins, the second clip is always mirrored at the edges, and that causes these artifacts that you can see here, like the stones being displayed in the sky. And I actually made another video about that about 2 years ago, where I show you exactly how to solve issues like that. So I will leave a link to that in the description. You will also find it in the upper right corner here. But generally, how it works is that you overlay these parts of the image with a solid color layer, for example, that has the same color as its surrounding, like the sky here in that example, or simply another clip. So it's a bit more complicated. Definitely watch this video there, but make sure that you watch for something like that, because when you see this transition, it just doesn't look good. And when you watch it later after I did this fix here, then you can see it looks so much better. So definitely watch for stuff like that. And let's come to tip number 5, and that's that smooth transitions should generally have camera motion in the same direction. It's not always perfectly the case, but if you generally stick to this rule, your transitions will look a lot better. So let me give you an example here, also from my Fuji X-T4 video with the waterfall. So here we have this sunset time-lapse at the beginning, and you see the camera moves down, and the camera also on the waterfall moves down, and that's why this transition works really good, even if it's like a mix of a speed ramp and a masking transition. What I did here, like I faked this mask by inserting my own object there, because it was kind of complicated. This transition actually took me about an hour to make, so definitely spend a bit more time on your transitions, then they will look better. But what you can generally tell here, just because the camera or the motion of the clips goes in the exact same direction with about the same speed, it looks good. Now the thing is here, it was a time-lapse that I shot with a slider, so the camera motion was actually only forward, and that's why I had to add the camera motion in post, which leads us to tip number 6, and that's to add camera motion if you don't have some, because especially if you have clips where there's no camera motion at all, and you suddenly insert a slide transition or whatever, then it looks kind of weird, like you can see here right now in that clip, because there I'm just walking, and suddenly the clip moves up to a friend walking, and that looks pretty bad. So what you can do to make that look better is to simply crop into the image, usually about 120-130% works good, and then you can use keyframe in your video editor. So in that case, I would use one keyframe at the beginning where I set the clip a bit lower from its Y position, and then at the end of the clip I would insert a keyframe where the clip is a bit higher shown, so that I have a camera motion that goes up. Now in Final Cut, it's a bit problematic. You first have to right click and then show video animation, and there you can change the keyframes from smooth to linear, because if it's smooth then it accelerates and decelerates, so that doesn't work most of the time. So linear is the way to go, so just for the Final Cut users here, but in Premiere I think you don't really have to do that. And as you can tell, after doing that, because I already have motion in the clip that fits to the motion of the transition, it looks a lot better. So if you have steady clips, or if the camera motion doesn't really fit, you usually have some options by keyframing, by adding animations in post to make that look better. And let's come to tip number 7, and that's that you don't necessarily need to have any fancy plugin or transition stuff going on to make a smooth transition. So what I mean here is that when you have clips that fit very well to each other, and oftentimes a simple jump cut or a slight fading transition like a crossfade already can do the job. So the example here is actually from Beautiful Destination, from their Philippines video. I will leave the link to that in the description below. It's a very good example for that, best one that I know. So here at first you can see basically tip 5, like the camera motion is in the same direction, and now it gets to this guy here that jumps in the water. When he jumps in the water, there is this white stuff from him hitting the water, and that transitions then into a waterfall, because it kind of looks the same, like it's this white stuff in the water when he enters, and then in the next clip you have the waterfall. And because it's in exactly the same position of the frame, they can simply add a fade. Like when I go through it frame by frame, you can see that it like transitions with a simple crossfade over 3 frames or so. And it only works because these two clips fit so well together. Now, maybe you have clips that have similarities like that, but they are not exactly in the same position of the frame. If you have something like that, then do what we basically did in the 6th tip, which is to crop in, but instead of adding an animation, you simply reframe your shot after zooming in so that it overlaps perfectly. And let's come to tip number 8, which can make certain transitions look a lot better, and that is to add a handheld effect to the transition. So the problem here is that you have 2 clips, so if you would add a handheld effect to each individual clip, then that could be problematic because the handheld motion doesn't fit. So what you simply do here in Final Cut at least is to create a so-called compound clip. So you mark all those clips, then you right click on it and you select compound clip. And I think in Adobe Premiere and DaVinci Resolve you have similar stuff that you can do to create a compound clip. If not, you can simply export these clips with a transition and then insert this exported clip again at the position where you want to have it, and then you add this handheld effect to the final clip, because that's basically the same. So here we have this compound clip and I simply add this handheld effect there, and then I make my adjustments until it looks good. So here it's like 40% and 80%. That makes it look pretty good, I would say. And you can directly tell, like, because it has this handheld stuff going on here, the transition just looks a bit more organic. Like it's not as steady and it doesn't look as edited as much. So it basically helps selling this transition because you have this additional motion in there which works across both clips. So aside from all these tips, I can only tell you to really try to develop a feeling for transitions. When does it feel right? When does it feel wrong? And if you have the impression that it doesn't feel right, then just play a bit more around with it. Like I mentioned over the course of this video, sometimes it takes me an hour to make a transition. Actually, when you watch some Colors videos, he also mentions that on his cloud to or ocean to cloud transition there, he took actually about 4 hours of that, and that's really where it's coming from. Like sometimes you have the vision on how the transition should look and feel, but it sometimes just takes time until you get where you want to be. And definitely take this time. It's better to publish a video maybe 1 day later, as long as you stick to your general schedule of publishing videos if you're a YouTuber, for example, than publishing a video with bad transitions, because this is really something where some people think, okay, looks amateurish, and they click away, but when it looks really good and professionally made, then people keep watching and it actually wows them. And this is actually the difference between pro and amateur transitions. Like amateur transitions, you just drag them into your timeline, but they don't really fit the footage. You can definitely tell that it's just dragged randomly inside there. But a pro transition is something where even if you can tell that it's a transition, it fits to the footage, it looks right. So definitely try to get to that level. I hope this video was helpful. If yes, then leave me a thumbs up, and also don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell notifications button for upcoming videos. I publish 1 to 2 tutorials every week, sometimes even 3. So I hope to see you in the next one.